Kia ora koutou, ngā mihi nui kia koutou, ko Barry Coates aho, ko te kārahi o te Patea Whaiwhakaro. So I'm Barry Coates, head of Mindful Money. Mindful Money is a charity I'll tell you a little bit more about towards the end. What I'm going to do is talk a little bit about what we mean by investing ethically or investing with our values, kind of what people think about it, and because there's a diversity of the way people think about their values and how they might invest in that context. I'll then sort of dive into a few areas to look at where our money goes, and then I'll come back out of it and show you the Mindful Money website, which is a kind of an easy way for you to be able to find out what you really invested in, and then leave plenty of time for questions. So does that sound okay? And please feel free to interrupt me as we go through. I don't mind at all, and really happy to have a discussion as we go along. So well, here we go. There. So this is just a short sort of kaupapa of sort of recent years of my life as opposed to the early years. I was actually born not far from here and grew up here for a while, and even went to St Mark's across the road when I was young. And I got a degree in undergrad in economics, and then worked in the Pacific Islands for a number of years as a volunteer, and eventually ended up doing a master's at Yale University in the US and working in world of finance and business. And then I had a kind of almost like a Damascene conversion to a different path. And the different path was partly because I started I'd always been interested in the environment, but I hadn't really appreciated sort of global poverty. Living in New Zealand, we don't have direct experience of people who live in poverty. And so this was a really formative event for me. This was, that's Rio de Janeiro. And many of you may remember in 1992, there was the Earth Summit there. Biggest conference ever held. It's all about environment and development, and coined the term sustainable development, signed the climate convention, the Framework Convention on Climate Change, signed the Convention on Biological Diversity, set up a program of action called Rio 21, which was all about living more lightly in the earth, but at the same time trying to tackle issues of inequality. And subsequently, I worked a lot with this guy in the UK, Jonathan Porritt, who still comes out to New Zealand a lot. He was born in New Zealand. His father was Governor General once upon a time. I was working for WWF at the time of the Earth Summit and was a member of the British government delegation as an NGO. And so we did a lot of stuff on sustainability in the UK and internationally. I then came back to New Zealand and headed Oxfam New Zealand for 10 years. And a lot of that was work in the Pacific Islands, which is still kind of my heart place. And those are children from an island called Bougainville in the Papua New Guinea group. Absolutely kind of wonderful place, but the Pacific is an area of the world which is both vulnerable and incredibly unique. And I then, after I left WWF, I worked in the business school at Auckland University for a while, setting up a sustainability program, and got an award for sustainability from the Sustainable Business Network. And at the end of that year, I ended up in Parliament. So I was a Green Party list MP. And I actually stood for the Epsom electorate a couple of times. So I was only there, though, for a year because Kevin Haig had left to go to Forest and Bird, some of you may remember, and I came in. And then we had a fairly precipitous election where Materia Ture had the effrontery to say that she had accepted benefit that she wasn't entitled to, trying to make the point about the inadequacy of benefit and the importance of children. And she was pilloried about it in the media, but more significantly was the rise of Jacinda. And she came in as Labour Party leader and sucked all the oxygen out of the Green Party. And so suddenly I wasn't in Parliament anymore. So that was great, because it gave me a chance to realise that I really didn't like politics at all, and for me to do something else. And when I'd been working kind of earlier on in my career, I'd always look for the levers of sustainability. You know, what is it that we can do to really make a difference? And I'd worked a lot around the economic sphere, but actually I came to realise that it's the way that money flows that is really, really vital for most decision making, like it or not, in our world around the way the economic system functions, and increasingly in the way our society functions. And so I got, in the early days, I'd been working in the UK on setting up an ethical investment forum in the UK, and then it was an idea, I thought, whose time had come. And so one of the reasons I think that is because we face kind of interlocking crises. I don't know if any of you know this work, but on the outside is the planetary boundaries, the systems that keep us alive on our planet. And we're breaching them. We're breaching from biodiversity loss, from land conversion, from nitrogen and phosphorus loading, and particularly from climate change. And others aren't doing so well either. But I had a colleague at Oxfam who was very good in being able to integrate the kind of mental maps of these things. And she defined something called donut economics. And I don't know if you've heard of Kate Raworth and donut economics, but she put donut economics at the center of the planetary boundaries to say, we don't live in a fair and just and sustainable world while people don't have their basic rights. And so this is, for her, the kind of the donut is a place where we have to live. We have to look at our planetary sustainability, but we also have to take care of people's rights and to basically care for others. So that's kind of that's a formative kind of framework for me, the thinking that we can't look at issues in isolation. We've actually got to be thinking a bit holistically about stuff. And then when I started sort of diving into the world of finance, this cartoon kind of said it all for me. And I know that it's a bit of a caricature, but actually it is so true. So yes, the planet got destroyed, but for a beautiful moment in time, we created a lot of value for shareholders. And it's not just a cartoon. It's the way the finance industry has operated for so long. And if you've ever talked to a financial advisor, what they'll talk to you endlessly is about all sorts of measures by how much money you're earning and all sorts of volatility measures and this and that and everything. But they won't tell you what your money does in terms of impacting people or the environment, because that's not the job of the finance sector. The job of the finance sector is to earn more money for the people who have money. And it took me ages to kind of actually realise that it wasn't that they couldn't count it or they couldn't understand it or something else. They just didn't figure it was relevant. And that the flows of money were completely absent from any filter or any screen around, so where does this money go and what does it do? So that was kind of the genesis of saying, okay, we want to tackle this. So I set up this thing called Mindful Money. And I'll come back to it, but we set it up in 2019. Grant Robertson did a big launch of it, and basically at that stage it had been me and over 18 months, something like 85 volunteers helping me put together this analysis. And the analysis that we're doing is we're looking at the way people's funds are invested. So there are about 400 KiwiSaver funds out there. There are about 500 other sort of managed funds, any kind of investment fund that you invest in. So there's around 900 funds. Some of them have got more than 5,000 companies that they invest in. So what we do is we pick all that system apart and we say, what are these companies in everyone's fund and what do these companies do? And particularly which ones of them do things that people should know about? And how do we decide what people should know about? Well, we did annual surveys. And we've done annual surveys for the past 7 years. On Monday, we're about to launch the 2025 survey. And they're of a representative sample of New Zealanders. And they ask questions about, so how do you think about your investments? How do you think about ethics? How do you think about sustainability? And it's provided really great guidance for us. And the two things that came out of it, people said, yes, we want to invest ethically. And that's kind of 3/4 of the population. But the second thing they said, but there are barriers. And the barriers are, there's no independent and objective information. And it takes too long to figure out how to compare across my different options. And it's exactly my problem when I started this. I tried to get an ethical KiwiSaver for myself, and I gave up after a week. You know, Masters in Finance from Yale University, I thought I'd be able to figure this out, but I couldn't. Because nobody talked about things in the same terms. There weren't common standards, or common languages, or common methodologies. There was no information available. People didn't tell you what they invested in. They might, if push comes to shove, tell you about the top 10 companies, but they didn't tell you about the whole portfolio. And they didn't tell you what those companies do, and there's just kind of a list of companies. So those are the kind of things that we wanted to start off with on Mindful Money. And in our surveys, we found out what people want to avoid. So the question is, what do you want to avoid in your investment? And the highest, by far, is human rights violations. 91% of New Zealanders want to avoid companies that violate human rights in their investments. 89% environmental damage, 86% cruelty to animals, 80% weapons, 75% tobacco and social harm, 73%. And the interesting thing about that is that when we started this, people say, oh, you're going to talk to people about, values. Well, everyone's got different values. You can't extrapolate across the whole population. And we said, yes, you can. 91% of people want to avoid companies that abuse human rights. So let's find out these companies that abuse human rights, which is not impossible to do, and we've done lots of research, so we know how to do that. And so we've got lists of all the global companies in each of these categories. And there are thousands of companies. So as you can see, that starts to be a big data problem here, 900 funds, up to 5,000 companies, and these 6 categories, some of which are, 1,000 companies for fossil fuels, for example. So we then put all these together, and then we're able to say for everyone, what's in your fund? And as a charity, we made the decision that we wanted to do this for free. And it is the world's worst business model to go out and do a huge amount of work and then give it all away for free. But in a way, that's kind of what we wanted to do. And so that's the journey we're on.
Barry,
yeah.
I've also, like Colin here, gone on your website and, to say, oh yes, you're sussing out the different KiwiSaver funds and stuff. I didn't appreciate you did that survey. I'm happily surprised by how high those figures are as a percentage. And I'm just curious whether you were as well.
Yes.
For me, with my values, and it helps restore some faith in, you know,
Isn't that interesting, eh? Yeah.
because you'd think they could all be down by at least 10 or more percentage points.
The other thing that's remarkable is not only that they're so high, but they have been incredibly stable over 7 years. And we even switched out the research provider who does the market research for us to produce these results. And over 7 years, the order of these things has been pretty much exactly the same, and the numbers have bounced around between about 93 and 90% for human rights. So, you know, the data is very solid on this. And the other interesting thing is, where do you think Australia is on this? Because we have an Australian partner, and they ask the same question. They're way lower on these. This is a Kiwi thing, you know, that actually, and it's really quite revealing. So that's
That's interesting by itself, apart from the other things you're going to tell us. That's a great bit of knowledge out there.
Yeah. So when we kind of figure out how much people put into each of those 6 categories, we add them back up. And for KiwiSaver funds, this is what they add up to. So for fossil fuel companies, it's not a huge amount of KiwiSaver, except it's kind of 3.5%. But look, it's $4.4 billion that KiwiSaver investors are investing into fossil fuel companies. Into human rights violations, almost $2 billion. Into animal cruelty, $1.6 billion. Environmental damage, $670 million. So these are significant amounts of money that KiwiSaver individuals are putting collectively into things that they are unhappy about. Because you see, they didn't want to invest in these things. They wanted to avoid these things. And so no wonder their providers didn't tell them where the money goes, because it would be embarrassing. See the weapons. So the weapons, when we first started this, we found that there was $100 million of KiwiSaver money going into production of nuclear weapons. And so we did some publicity on that, got some coverage in the media, and we went back to the companies year after year after year. And that $100 million is now $15 million. We'd like to drive it down to 0, and it seems very bizarre to me that New Zealand would be having investments of the public's money into the production of nuclear weapons. But that's the kind of thing that's in behind these figures. Over time, as we expose these things to the light of day, and we have this sort of Dracula theory about transparency, that when there's a KiwiSaver manager and their child goes on to Mindful Money and says, "Daddy, what are you doing investing in those things?" Daddy's going to be quite embarrassed. And so that the whole transparency has really helped to be able to drive these numbers down. And these numbers are way, way lower than they were previously, except for one number, which is, surprisingly enough, in the middle of a climate crisis, fossil fuels. And the reason is because Russia invaded Ukraine. And so all of the fund managers thought, oh, juicy, oil prices go up, we can earn lots of short-term returns, let's pile our money back into fossil fuels. And that's what happened. I'll show you the graph later on of how that turned out for them. So what we're really trying to do is, this is a statue on Wall Street, which is, I think, really poignant. That's the raging bull of Wall Street. And this, I don't know how they ever got to do this, but this is a kind of a feisty young girl who's standing up to the raging bull. And I think it's such a great symbol of the fact that whose money is it? Very often it's the public's money. And the public can stand up to the raging bull, particularly if we do it collectively. And so it's something that reminds me of the power of the individual investor. This is the most complicated slide I'm going to show, but it's about, if you want to invest ethically or responsibly, there's different ways to do it. So traditionally, like the people in the cave, you ignore it, ignore where your money goes, and you just try and earn the highest return. The first stage, if you're trying to do something about this, is you avoid stuff. So you don't invest in fossil fuels, or you don't invest in tobacco, or you don't invest in gambling, or all these other things that people are concerned about. And most of the funds do a little bit of this. Very few of them do it anything like the degree to which the public wants them to do, as shown in the surveys. Thirdly, what you can do is if you've got all these companies that you invest in, you can use your governance power because you've got the shares of these companies, so you can use your power as a shareholder to try and influence those companies, often called engagement or stewardship. And you're trying to improve their performance. It's great in theory, but actually it doesn't always work out quite so well in practice. But it's important that all the fund managers do this, that they try and use their influence for good. Yeah? You can invest in better standards, but on the right-hand side, it's kind of almost like where people really want to go. They want to put their money into something that has a positive impact. They want to put it into things that they feel good about. And what that looks like is social housing, renewable energy, communities. And until recently, you couldn't invest in these things because they weren't part of your managed funds, your KiwiSaver or your managed funds. But in about 5 years ago, an organisation which came out of Christian Savings, it's called Community Finance, started working with community housing providers, and they figured out that they could get money from the mainstream KiwiSaver and fund managers and put it into social housing. And the fund managers could get a return because the government paid the accommodation allowances. So there was quite secure money because they knew they were going to get a return on their money. So why wouldn't you have private sector investment in that? And so the first one was a Salvation Army project building 118 houses in Auckland. And subsequently, there's been more of those. And just this week, some of you may have heard Chris Bishop announcing $150 million for exactly this. That's a drop in the bucket, but the government's talked about a guarantee for this finance, which could be transformative. Now, the government wants to do it because they don't like public funding through Kāinga Ora. It's kind of like an ideological thing, I think. But in a way, I think we can be quite optimistic about this because one of the things that Salvation Army and Emerge and all of the other housing providers do is that they not only build houses, they often wrap around services. And it's really important. And I think this is the best news I've heard for a very long time. But the thing is, that changes the picture a bit because, and funnily enough, just as an anecdote, the survey that we will release on Monday shows that when you ask the question, and this is particularly to young people and people without much money in their KiwiSaver account, would you save more if you knew that your savings were going to be invested in something that made a positive difference? And about 60% of them say yes. Wow. Which is really interesting. Most people, when they do financial education or financial literacy or anything like that, they talk about really boring things. If they talked about this, and they talked about climate change, and they talked about things that young people really care about, and they said, actually, you can contribute to doing good, then you'll find a lot more young people saying, okay, yeah, it's a good idea. I'll that's a reason for me to save. So we're trying to kind of promote that message. And climate change is obviously crucial. You can, like that sort of chart that I showed, this is an equivalent for climate change. If you've got an investment fund, there are some things that can be done in order to lower the emissions of your fund. And some of you may know that you have what's called a carbon footprint. The idea of a carbon footprint, that much from driving your car, that much from hopping on an aeroplane, that much from eating meat, etc., etc. The one that's never counted is where does your money go? And how much emissions does your money finance? And we've done the calculation, which is to say it is one of the biggest influences that you can have, more so than most other things that are in your carbon footprint. And so you can influence it by avoiding things, by engaging with things, and investing in renewable energy and climate solutions. And those are the ways that you can influence your carbon footprint. So for me, this is kind of a touchstone, not only kind of the personal experience of climate change, but also the context of the global goals and the fact that we are sort of headlong into a climate crisis, but we have to remember all the other stuff going on in the world as well. And I wanted to just finish off with one thing, because the question that I often get is, so this is all very well and good, but won't I earn less money? And the answer is no. And here's one of the reasons. The average for the US stock market is called the S&P 500. 500 top companies. This is a chart of their average over the past 10 years to January this year. So benchmarked at 100%, it's increased by threefold. So if you had $1,000 there, you'd have $3,000 at the end of 10 years. So pretty good return. Yep. This is the US oil and gas index. And so what you've seen is this has diverged more and more. And there's a nice little blip going on here around the time that Ukraine was invaded by Russia. But actually, they didn't really make much money out of that. And what they did is they gave more capital into the fossil fuel companies. And if you look on Mindful Money website, we make a distinction between the fossil fuel companies that are trying to transition to renewable energy and those that are doubling down on fossil fuels and actually increasing their production. And so it gives you an idea of who the really bad companies are. But this is an answer to say, well, actually, if you invest in a fund which doesn't invest in those fossil fuel companies, actually your returns are going to be higher. And it sits alongside other evidence to say that if you invest in companies that have strong sustainability standards, they have good brands. Everyone loves their brands. They have a good reputation. Their employees are typically motivated. They're not getting sued for environmental liabilities and other lawsuits. And basically, there is a relationship between well-managed companies, sustainable companies, and good financial performance. So actually, when you look at the evidence over the past couple of decades, ethical investment has been associated more often with higher returns than traditional investing. So rather than having a trade-off between, you invest ethically or you earn higher returns, actually investing ethically is a route to higher returns. And that's a really important thing. And interestingly, we thought this was just about people who had kind of looked at the evidence and were experts, but we asked that same question in our survey. And a lot of people don't know. 40% of people will say, I don't know. The question is kind of, if you invest ethically, will it mean higher long-term returns? 40% of people say, I don't know. But more than 40% of people say yes. And only 11% of people say no. So actually the public's kind of getting this stuff. And one of the things that we've seen is a huge growth in the kind of ethical investing. And we see some of the funds that do ethical investing doing really well, attracting more customers, and so there's a really good news story in there. So let me then make things really complicated. And I'm not sure I can do this. Is this Wi-Fi enabled?
Yep.
I should have signed up. So why don't you talk to each other for a little while, and I'll just see if I can get online.
Yep.
Hey, here we are. Sorry about that. That was very clunky of me. So this is the Mindful Money website. So www.mindfulmoney.nz. And it's kind of, I thought I'd just show you how it works, and apologies to those who've already had a look at their funds. But there are two things you can do primarily. There's actually a lot of stuff along the top, and I'll explain that later. But the two key things here. One is check your fund, and secondly is find a fund. So let's go into check your fund first. And I'm going to just put in one, and then I'll ask you for whatever fund you want to put in. But let me put in the ANZ growth. Here we go. As you start, there we go. So what this then does is it shows you how much investments you have in the issues of concern, right? So you have, see the yellow, you just can use your cursor to sit alongside that, and that says human rights 1%. So 1% of your portfolio is in companies that violate human rights. And we just include the most serious violations of human rights. And then about 1% in environmental harm, 1.5% in animal cruelty, and the big one here is fossil fuels. So let's then go to this thing that says fund details. If we click that, what you can see is you can see the companies. And this is kind of interesting because it sort of brings it to life to say, okay, what am I invested in? So Meta, we've defined Meta as abusing privacy and causing social harm. Rio Tinto, some of you may remember, they destroyed 46,000-year-old cave paintings of the Aboriginal people in the Pilbara area. Johnson & Johnson lawsuits repeatedly for medical malpractice. Thermo Fisher Scientific have been found to, their instrumentation has been used in surveillance of Uyghur people in China, etc. And then on the right-hand side, you see some of the fossil fuel companies. So where I said you can tell the difference between them, I haven't got a pointer, but 1.5 is a kind of 1.5 pathway. So they're transitioning. It's Contact Energy, they're investing in geothermal and solar power and so on. But then BHP is actually doubling down on coal and oil and gas. If you look at Shell, Shell used to have environmental commitments and has just basically thrown those out of the window and put all their capital expenditure into providing more oil and gas. So you can see for each of these companies what companies you're invested in if you've invested in an ANZ growth company, growth fund. And you can then have a choice. You can either say, I'm not happy with that, and go and find another fund. Or you can go to ANZ and say, please change your portfolio. And I think you possibly know how successful that strategy is going to be. And so then we have the fund finder that helps you find another fund. But let's do another check fund. And has anyone got a fund that they want to find out? It can be KiwiSaver, it can be non-KiwiSaver.
Oh, Simplicity.
Simplicity, okay. So start typing in Simplicity and we're in the KiwiSaver section, so it's the same fund for whether or not it's, and then you can see here the comparison. There's your AMP growth fund, and there's the Simplicity one. And so what's the Simplicity one got in it? It's got a few things that we have a dialogue with Sam Stubbs and the folks, but they also have a few companies that we think maybe they shouldn't be invested in. So that's some Simplicity. Anyone got another one they want to find out? Shall I? Yeah, I was going to say, why don't I show you Pathfinder? Good question. And spoiler alert: Pathfinder is a fairly strong ethical fund. So again, we've got the ANZ Growth Fund, and there's Pathfinder, and there's Simplicity. So, and that blue thing there is for fossil fuels, but it's all Contact Energy. So that's the only company which is one of the better of the fossil fuel companies that's in transition. So we do annual awards for funds to which are the most ethical funds, and Pathfinder usually wins the KiwiSaver and Managed Funds Awards. So that's a way you can use the website to find out where your investments are. And at the stage that you want to say, okay, let's go and find a fund. So let's do, instead of KiwiSaver, we'll do investment funds. And we're going to ask you a number of questions. So which of these things do you want to avoid? And a lot of people just say, well, actually, I don't like any of them. So they go straight for the avoid them all. And then we say, choose your approach. And this approach is kind of, what's important to you? Do you want to avoid issues that you're worried about, the ones that you just identified? Or do you want to do this engagement, so you engage with companies to try and raise their standards? Or do you just want funds with higher returns? And so you can order these up and down, and then change the order and decide what's best for you, and then choose your risk profile. And for people who want to be invested for a long time, they would tend to go for growth and aggressive funds and try and get higher returns. People who might need their money soon, and those who are worried about the stability of their money, would typically go for defensive and conservative funds. So you've got your kind of choices of how much risk you want to take with your investment. And as usual, more risk means more returns. And so you've got your choices in there. So you choose, let's say for argument's sake, we will choose a growth and aggressive, and then you'll see your results. And what we show you is the funds that will most closely meet your criteria. So we're not telling you what to invest in, but here's a list of those that most closely meet the criteria that you've put in for your fund. So we've talked about Pathfinder, a couple of Pathfinder, a Booster Socially Responsible Fund. This is a Te Ao Māori fund, Tahito, interesting fund. Mercer's got one there, Booster, Harbour, etc. So that's the kind of way that people use the website. They can go and find out more about these funds. So if you want to go and have a look at the Pathfinder Water Fund, you have the details. And then up here, you've shown the issues of concern. This has got no issues of concern. But you can see here there's a whole lot of information about this fund. So it tells you when it was started, what the history of the funds, who's in charge of it, and a whole lot of documents in there. You can see the past returns, and those are benchmarked against the average for the risk category. So this is the average for all the growth funds, and this is how the water fund did against that. and it'll tell you kind of what kind of investments you make in terms of the different types of assets. So everything from cash, commodities, international equities, fixed interest, and so on. So you've got all that information there, and then you can either make a choice, and if you want to make a choice, then you can go through and invest in that fund. What happens then is you get a fund referral, and you go. This leads you straight through to the application form for the fund. When you do, that's recorded by the fund, and we have a relationship with the funds on there that are the more ethical ones, and they help us with some of our costs. So it pays about a quarter of our costs, but it's helpful, and it's a way that they contribute to the costs of the system. So that's about it. Let me just come back to this and just finish off. So just a quick word about Mindful Money. So in addition to doing sorry, just one second. Okay. Oh. In addition to doing that transparency, we also do research. So impact investing, or investing for good. We've done a big report together with lots of fund managers, trying to encourage them to go further, invest in more social housing, more renewable energy, etc. We've done a deep dive into fossil fuel investment. This is the annual survey, which is coming out on Monday, and we're currently doing a big report on oceans and investment. So identifying the kind of investments that are destroying our oceans, because it's kind of a hidden crisis going on in our oceans. And this is kind of an extraordinarily complex slide, but so what does Mindful Money do? We help fund managers to avoid harm, to engage and raise standards, shift towards better companies, and invest for positive impact. We do it by educating and mobilising the public, by supporting and influencing the investment providers, and by changing the framework through government policy and lobbying. And here are all the sort of different ways, calling out greenwash and bad practices, building capacity, engaging across the sector. And we do a whole lot of stuff in order to do that. We have 7 staff, all part-time, and so it's been an interesting process setting up the organisation, and we do get funding from charitable sector. So if anyone ever feels like it, then we'd use your money really well. But it's we've got great plans, and doing the next big piece of work is being able to show you, when we show those companies of concern on the website, we want to show you where the good companies are as well, and which portfolios. And literally, today we made a big step on that project, and so we're trying to do that project over the next few months. It's a huge change to the website, massive amount of research behind it, getting to know thousands of companies and screening thousands of companies, etc. But we kind of know what we're trying to do and how. So that's coming up. So let me open up for questions.
Mary, this may be the elephant in the room question, and I know that this is the private sector, but the public sector is something that we can. The public sector is something we can't influence, except maybe every 3 years through a vote.
Yes.
But the GSF, which I have an interest in, but also the Cullen Fund.
Yes.
Is an enormous public investor, which contributes significantly to New Zealand superannuation, as I understand it.
Yeah.
Do you have any indication of the ethics of those public funds?
Yeah. Less so the GSF, but certainly the Superfund and ACC, which are the two big ones. So Superfund, about $70 billion investments, and KiwiSaver by comparison is about 130 billion. So just the Cullen Fund or the Superfund itself is kind of, 2/3 of the size of all the KiwiSaver funds put together. When we do an analysis of them, they do some things really well and other things not so well. The things that they've done really well is they've done a good job on climate change. And it's quite interesting because they've been quite influential across the sector. And early on, they said that climate change is a risk to the climate, to people, but it's also a financial risk. And they did the analysis to say what would happen if we divested most of our fossil fuels, sold most of our fossil fuel companies. And they found out that they would have in the last year earned $800 million more by getting rid of those fossil fuel companies. And so they did. And then they set new targets and they went further. So on climate change, they've got a good story to tell. Still, got a few companies in there that we would question, but on some of the other things, they haven't done quite so well. So there are two particular areas. One, the way they define nuclear weapons is quite narrowly. So they talk about the nuclear warheads, but they don't talk about the componentry and the delivery vehicles like the missiles. And so they still invest in companies that make missiles, even if they don't invest in the warhead manufacturer. So we've had an ongoing discussion with them about that. And the other thing is around investments in companies that support Israeli settlements in occupied Palestine. And that's one where certainly since the International Court of Justice ruling, it's clearly internationally illegal and has been for quite some time under UN Security Council resolutions, but now the ICJ has ruled, and really they should not be investing. So we've been regularly monitoring all of the funds and the super fund on how they're investing in that conflict. Also in the companies that make the weapons that are dropped on Gaza. So we've published that stuff. So on some of those areas, Superfund hasn't done so well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
How much influence, though, by publishing this, are you having on such activity?
A little bit on the Superfund. I would say that the way we have influence over the Superfund is much more through politics, in politicians asking questions in select committees, etc. With regard to the KiwiSaver funds, we have quite a lot of influence because last year 120,000 people used our website for research. So if 120,000 people are there saying, gee, look at what's in ANZ's growth fund, I don't think I want to invest in there anymore. People are shifting. And the one thing that surprised me is how slow the investment funds have been to wake up to what people want. I mean, if it was a consumer goods manufacturer, they would have changed like that. But because they're money managers, they tend to be very expert-oriented and fairly arrogant. And so they think that they know best and all this kind of ethical stuff. And it's not true for them all. Some of them are great, but there are, there's still a big weight of the industry that we haven't been able to shift.
How far are the money managers incentivised by places to invest? And how negative is that?
Not really. So they don't get a kickback from the people they invest in. So it is just a case of going and buying shares in the same way that you could go and buy shares. So they don't get kickbacks in that way. They do earn fees, of course. And some of them earn quite high fees. And until recently, some of them earn performance bonuses as well. And so there was one notorious case of one of the funds, who shall remain nameless, that invested in crypto. And they invested in crypto, and crypto went up, and they all paid themselves huge bonuses. And then crypto went down. Do you think they gave the money back? So yes, there is some of that happens, but actually not so much for most of the industry. And most of the problem is the way they think about finance is a very kind of old-fashioned way. It's about the people in the cave. It's just that you know, we don't want to do anything else that might compromise financial returns, without actually understanding that their financial returns would often be higher if they did the right thing.
Barry, with the investments,
Yeah,
we've been talking about KiwiSaver.
yeah.
Is there any difference with the other funds managers? I'm thinking people like Craig's and so on. Do you find them easier to work with or harder to work with?
Much harder. Much harder. So it's a really good point. So you've got three different categories in the finance industry, you know, broadly. So you've got the fund managers that have mainly been talking about, the Pathfinder, Simplicities, ANZ, etc. Because the banks also kind of manage money as well as banks. And then you've got the what we call the wealth managers. And the wealth managers are the people who advise you, and they invest your money for you. And they either invest it under your instructions, or you say, oh no, you can do it, you know, take the right decisions, and they do that. Some of them do know about investing ethically, but most of them, we would say, have been very slow to do two things. One is to ask the question. If you go and see a wealth manager or a financial advisor, they are obliged by law to go through a process that says, know your client. And that's in regulations. And we would say knowing your client means, what do they care about? What are their ethical values? What do they want from their investment? What do they want to avoid? And very, very few financial advisors ask that question. Again, in the survey we asked people, the public, when you go and see a financial advisor, do they ask you about ethics? Half of them said yes. But most of those said it was a cursory question. And they didn't go far in there. So there is a problem here that most people do care about this stuff, but actually they're not getting the chance to influence the way that their money is invested. So if any of you do have money with wealth managers or financial advisors, really important that you dig into it and you say, you know, tell me about the companies here. I want my money to be managed ethically. Here are the issues that I care about. I don't want those in my portfolio. And so if you are insistent enough, generally the wealth managers will have to respond because they don't want to lose your business. But it's really hard because they'll use all sorts of expert knowledge to say, well, you shouldn't worry about that. You know, it's fine. You know. Yeah. Hi.
You've got fund managers, wealth managers, and what's the third one, please?
Oh yeah, that was a good question. Thank you. I often do that. The third one is asset owners, and they're really interesting because we're asset owners. We're the people who kind of own the money that other people are investing for us, and so the asset owners are also churches. And we've had a long dialogue with the Anglican Church, for example, around the Anglicans' investment policies, which we regard as how should I say, not strong enough. And I was a good friend of the late Rod Oram and went along with him to the General Synod at a time when the General Synod said, yes, we want to have proper ethical investment policy that doesn't include fossil fuel companies. And it still hasn't happened. And so they're asset owners. Trusts and foundations are asset owners. Insurance companies, others that have pools of capital to invest are asset owners. And they're really important because they should be saying, like that example of you telling your financial advisor, they should be saying how they want their money invested. Very often they don't. Very, very often somebody's telling them about what they should do with their money rather than them actually having a say. So yeah, thanks for the question. That was just as well you asked.
Is there an argument, counterintuitive though it may seem, that by being outside the tent, you're not inside the tent influencing people, on the basis that if you don't invest or you do divest, somebody else will take up that investment?
Great. Thank you. I should have explained that. So yeah, it's like if you have buy a share of a company, and then you say, oh, don't like that company, I'm going to sell my share. Does the company really care about that? No, because somebody else will buy your share. But the fallacy is that's what happens at an individual level. If people act collectively, then they have a huge impact. And on fossil fuels, one of the reasons that those fossil fuel lines are diverging is because there's $40 trillion of investment under management that won't invest in fossil fuels. And what it does is it lowers the share price of those because there's not as much capital available. It's supply and demand. It's kind of not surprising that if you have enough of an effect, then the equation between supply and demand changes. And that happens for the finance industry as it happens for every single economic market around the world. And so a lot of people who say, oh, it doesn't matter if you divest, they're talking about it at the incremental level, not at a broader level. And I think it's a really important point because it's easy to get disempowered and say, oh, it doesn't matter what I do. But on the other hand, it does if you're part of a movement of people, and there is a huge movement of people on weapons, on tobacco, on fossil fuels, on human rights violations. And they are working across international boundaries in order to remove capital away from the bad companies. And
there is a tipping point. When there's a critical mass, there's a tipping point.
Yeah, exactly. You can see it in the reverse, actually. Remember a few years ago, Meridian, they got on a list of one of the big investors called BlackRock, the biggest international investor in the world. Huge. And BlackRock put them on an index, and that meant that everyone kind of piled in to invest in this index, and Meridian was part of that. And so suddenly Meridian got a whole lot more demand for its shares. What happened to its share price? It went up by 40% in the space of a week. And then they changed the definition of the index, and Meridian's price went back down again. So anyone who says it doesn't matter whether you divest or invest, of course it does. And you can see it all the time. And so it's another reason why it's good to invest in kind of the renewable energy companies and the companies that are doing good things, because it helps them raise capital and helps them to grow as companies.
Barry, just on that point,
Yeah.
what is the sort of level of trend toward more ethical and away from the old, evil spaces?
Yeah, we monitor it year on year, and in fact every 6 months, and so we can trace it quite incrementally for New Zealand. Internationally, it varies. In the US, it's been all over the place. And certainly at the moment, you know, it's kind of... In the moment in the US, the right-wing Republican states are basically saying any fund manager who uses social and environmental factors in their investment will not qualify for fund management. And it's affected about $3 billion of fund managers. So the US is... but for the rest of the world, the trend towards ethical investing is still increasing. And one of the reasons is because actually these fund managers are waking up to the fact that they can earn higher returns. And you know, if you're a kind of pure economist, you'd say, well, gee, how is that? You know, don't markets work so that you shouldn't be able to do that? But actually markets don't always work. And you just take climate change as an example. If you did a poll of people who work on Wall Street, who are the ones who mainly determine share prices, and say, which of you believe in climate change? Then a fair few of them are going to say, we don't believe in climate change. And so they're the ones who are determining some of the values of companies. So they're constantly understating issues, social issues, environmental issues, weapons issues, what people care about.
So Barry, what can we do? Clearly having a look at your website and going on there and finding our own particular funds and perhaps changing and, you know, if we want to invest more ethically. But when I was looking at how we could perhaps raise awareness within our own little community here, I look at your website, your company, your organisation, there's a fair bit of awareness raising in workplaces I was interested in.
Yes.
So can you tell us a little bit about that and how we can point people towards what that looks like in reality? Come along at lunchtime and talk about it? Or
Exactly. Yeah, you know, I go around lots of places, talk at lunchtimes, do it online if it's not convenient. Location works beautifully online. And it's a good way because you've got sort of people a bit captive over lunchtime and that works. As a small charity, we haven't got money for advertising, and I'll show you just one exception to that. But so word of mouth is everything. And if you're a young person, you'll often see Mindful Money on social media, and we do a lot on Instagram and others. Try and avoid Facebook wherever we can. So there's a really strong word of mouth. So the best thing you could probably do is tell other people. And because, you know, being a small charity, you know, people are still finding out about us. And they don't know that it's there for free and you know, go and use it. You know, it's kind of like, we have also gone to institutions, we've gone to some retirement homes, we've gone to, you know, all sorts of places to talk about this stuff. And so I'm doing a kind of regional tour coming up around New Zealand. A lot of our stuff though is online. Do lots of webinars and conferences. Got a big conference coming up on 5th of June if anyone would be interested. It's downtown on Princes Wharf and be a couple of hundred people there. And we're talking particularly about climate change and investing in nature.
Right.
And lots of people going to be there. Some of you may know the company director, Rob Campbell. So Rob's keynote speaker there, and we've got Jesse Mulligan is our MC for the awards, and so it's kind of a fun thing. So we do events like that to get the word out as well, and we do a lot of media work. So you'll probably hear us about this consumer survey, particularly on Radio New Zealand. Very good at covering us and stuff and a few other channels. So that's the way we get the word out.
Well, I think we can commit to supporting that and promoting events such as that one down town and in our small way.
Fantastic.
Advertising and promoting within our own group, certainly.
That would be great. And if there are any avenues to talk to the Anglican Church, I would love to talk to anyone who can help us do that, because it is. It feels really like something that would be kind of really important and in line with the values of the church. And I've been constantly disappointed that and particularly kind of having had a strong friendship with Rod Oram to kind of, you know, to see that carried through would mean a lot.
Yeah.
Just out of interest, because we're of course in the Presbyterian tradition here, but all the big
Sorry,
churches
yeah.
have got
Yeah.
huge
Yeah.
funds and
Yeah.
you know, property and stuff. Are any of the other church funds any better? I'd be suspicious. They're all relatively conservative.
And most of them rely on financial advisors or what's called asset consultants, and most of those are not committed to this agenda.
Yeah,
So sorry, I should have, instead of talking about Anglicans, I should have said Presbyterians, but yeah.
Beat up the others down the road.
Yeah, exactly.
Barry, your asset control consultant and asset managers, are they one of the same?
No, asset consultants are like financial advisors. So they're people who give advice about where they should put their money. So they're you probably wouldn't have heard of them. They tend to be kind of technical people around investment advice and
Analysts. Or,
yeah, exactly, financial analysts. Yeah.
okay, you mentioned about by law the questions they've got to ask. Know your client. What are the others?
There's some stuff around know what products you're recommending people to, avoiding conflicts of interest, and there's another couple. I think.
Suitability.
Sorry.
Suitability.
Suitability. Yes. You've.
Well, there's been a big case recently.
Yes. Yes.
Mm.
I did my financial advisor qualifications, but I've forgotten the rest of those factors, so excuse me. But yes, suitability is one of them. Yeah.
This is just off the top of the head idea, but
Yeah.
I don't know whether this is feasible. In the same way that some companies and corporate employers have got on board with sustainable living wage.
Yep.
Employers have the ability to increase their contributions as a percentage to their
Yes.
employees' contributions, and I wonder if there's any mileage in some responsible employers taking a lead and saying, well, we will increase our employers' contribution to our staff to our staff's KiwiSaver on the basis that we support these particular funds and this particular philosophy of investing. Is that a...
Yeah, no, it's a nice idea. We'd actually thought of having workplaces which would declare themselves as an ethical investment workplace. And so that may well be part of the criteria. So part of the criteria may be telling staff about ethical options that they have. Part of the criteria might then be saying, in that case, we will support those who want to invest ethically. So, yeah, let me think about that one. So, I'll just show you one other thing which just kind of fun. Does anyone recognise this person?
Oh, maybe Coleman.
Yeah.
Billions of your hard-earned pounds. Hello, my name is Olivia Coleman. And on behalf of the fossil fuel industries, I would like to say a huge thank you for all your support this bumper year. People like you have pumped billions of your hard-earned pounds into our gas and oil businesses. The cash from your pensions has helped us dig, drill and destroy more of the planet than ever before. We've even managed to build a few little wind turbines to keep Greta and her chums happy. Cute, you see every little drop from your precious nest egg adds up. So while the global temperature may go up a teensy-weensy degree or two, our profits are literally soaring. And that's all thanks to you. So to guarantee us all a warmer, snugglier future, please keep sending your pensions our way. You know the drill.
Very good.
Fracking hell.
Wow.
There we go.
That's really good.
Right.
Yeah.